Are you interested to learn CSS Flexbox? Then you are in right place. Hello, my name is Jayant Sarkar. I am full stack web developer and online instructor. You know the importance of responsive website, and Flexbox play the key role to make our website responsive. Similar to CSS Grid, Flexbox is used to create complex structures. So without wasting your time, let me introduce you what is Flexbox.
So let's try to understand what is Flexbox. Basically, Flexbox is a new module in CSS3. It's make alignment very easier in different direction and different order. It gives container the ability to expand and shrink elements to best use all the available space. So this is the best way to use all the available space. And our next point is CSS Flexbox layout replace float layout. Similar to the grid layout, it also can replace float layout. It made our job very easier. Using Flexbox, you can create one-dimensional layout very easily. CSS Grid is not one-dimensional, it is two-dimensional, but CSS Flexbox is one-dimensional. You cannot handle row height and column width together. At a time, you can handle only one dimension, row, otherwise column. Suppose this is our main container, and inside this parent container, we have 4 subdips. We call the container Flex container. And if you want to create it Flexbox, then you need to use display property. Display flex. In our parent container, we need to use this property. And then it convert into a flex container. And all the items inside the flex container, now they are flex items. As I told you earlier, Flexbox work in one-dimensional way. Row-wise, otherwise column-wise. If we talk about rows, means horizontal way, for that we call the axis main axis. Otherwise, you can call it rows. And if I talk about vertical dimension, then we call it cross axis. Otherwise, you can call it columns. So let's see a little demonstration how we can use a Flexbox. Here you can see side by side I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using Live Server extension. And I already create a HTML document named index.html. And as you can see, there is a parent div which classes container. And inside this parent container, we have total 4 items. And as you can see, we use different classes for all of this. Item 1, item 2, item 3 and item 4. And I already set a background color to our all the subdips. And as you can see, our parent container width is 600. And also I set a background color, margin and border to this parent container. Now, if I want to make it flex container, for this, we need to use display property. Display, and I'm going to use flex value. As you can see, we have total 4 rows in our parent container. If I save this file, as you can see, it automatically saves all the items in one row. So now it's little clear for you. When we convert our parent container in a Flexbox, whatever item in our container, it's come in one row. In our upcoming tutorial, we are going to learn some new properties. So let's see the properties. There are total 12 properties that you can use with Flexbox. Flex-Direction, Flex-Wrap, Flex-Flow, Flex-Grow, Flex-Shrink, Flex-Basics, Flex, Justify-Content, Align-Content, Align-Item, Align-Self, at last Order. And for alignment, we use this property. And we already learned about it in our grid chapter.
Now, let's talk about flex direction property.
Let's see the values of this property. As you can see, we have total 4 values related CSS Flex Direction. Row, row reverse, column and column reverse. And row is our default value in this property. So let's start the practical and see how it's work. Here you can see side by side I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using Live Server extension. And I already created a HTML document named index.html. And as you can see in my document, there is a container. And inside this container, we have total 4 flex items. And as you can see, we already convert our container Flexbox. And you already know that if we use display flex property, then it put our items in a single row. And in this tutorial, we are going to talk about flex direction property. This property is related to container, not the items. So I'm going to use it after display property. And I'm going to type flex direction. And our first value is row. If I save this file, here you can see there is no changes. And as I told you, row is the default value. If you use it, it's not going to affect on your structure. And by default, row follow the left to right direction. But if I use row reverse value, let me show you, and then save the file, now you can see the result. Here you can see it's reverse the order of our item. Now the direction is right to left. So this is the use case of row reverse value. And our next value is column. Let me show you. So I'm going to type column. This value works vertically. If I save this file, you can see the result. Basically it follows top to bottom order. As you can see, first, second, third, fourth. And if you want to arrange it bottom to top, then you need to use another value, which is column reverse. If I save this file, you can see the result. Here you can see our first item came to the bottom, then comes second and then third. And our last item came to the top position. So it's basically changed the direction from bottom to top. And if I use only column value, then the direction will be top to bottom. So this is the flex direction property. As I told you earlier, it's work on one-dimensional way. At a time, it's work with row-wise, otherwise column-wise. And you cannot handle row and column together. So I hope now the flex direction property is clear for you.
Before we jump into our next Flexbox property, let me tell you something. If you are looking for best web hosting, then Hostinger can provide you that. And if you use my promo code JOYANTA, JAYANTA, then you can get 20% instant discount. Just apply the promo code and you can get 20% discount instantly. Link at the description. Next we are going to learn FlexWrap and FlexFlow property.
These two new properties are very important in our Flexbox. So without further discussion, let's start the practical. As you can see, side by side, I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using Live Server extension. And I already created a HTML document named index.html. And here you can see, in our container, we have total 4 flex items. And our container size is bigger than flex items. And if I increase the flex item in this box, otherwise if I reduce the container width, in that case, items are overflown to this container. Let me show you. I already create 6 other flex items. And I'm going to uncomment these div tags. And I'm going to save this file. Now you can see we have total 10 flex items in our container. And now I'm going to reduce the container width using width property. So I'm going to type width 400 pixel. If I save this file, here you can see the result. Here you can see flex items are overflown to this container. Similarly, if I use height property and increase the height 200 pixel and save this file, you can see this result. But if I change the flex direction, let me show you, flex direction column and then save the file, now you can see once again flex items are overflown to this container. To solve this kind of problem, we have another flex property, which is FlexWrap. Basically, FlexWrap has 3 values: no wrap, wrap, and wrap reverse. No wrap is our default value. If you use or not, it's going to overflow your data. So let's see how it's worked. For this, I'm going to use flex direction row. And also I'm going to set a width of this container. Width 400 pixel. If I set this file, you can see the result. And now I'm going to use FlexWrap property. FlexWrap. At first, I'm going to use no wrap value. If I set this file, here you can see there is no changes. Because this is the default value of this property. So it's not going to affect the flex items. And if you want to wrap it, you need to use wrap value. Let me show you. If I save this file, now you can see the result. Now you can see our container width is still 400 pixel, but it perfectly wrap our flex item inside this container. As you can see, it automatically come to the next line. Let's add some margin between this flex item. So I'm going to type margin 5 pixel. If I save this file, you can see the result. So now it's clear for you, when data overflow from the first line, then it's automatically came to the next line. Then it's automatically come to the next line. But if I change the flex direction column, and also I want to use height property, height 200 pixel, and I'm going to comment out the width property. if I save this file, now you can see the result. Here you can see it's set in vertically order. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. I hope now it's clear for you how items are set in vertically order. And now I'm going to use the next value of this property, which is wrap reverse. So I'm going to type wrap reverse. If I save this file, now you can see it is just reverse the order of items. And now it starts from the right side and end it left side. And if I change the flex direction row wise and set width of this container and comment out height and save this file, as you can see our items start from the second line of this container. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. Basically, we use wrap property to control overflow data. I hope you got the point. And our next property is Flex-Flow. What is Flex-Flow? It is a shorthand property of flex wrap and flex direction. Using one property, you can control both the properties. And we can use it in one line. So, I'm going to use Flex-Flow property. Flex-Flow. Here, first we need to provide flex direction value and then we need to provide flex wrap value. So first, our flex direction value is column and our flex wrap value is wrap. And I'm going to comment out this two property. And also need to comment out width property because we use column value. And I'm going to uncomment the height property. If I save this file, here you can see it's worked perfectly. If I use no wrap value here and save this file, now you can see our flex items are overflown to this container. Basically, Flex-Flow is one-liner of these two property, flex direction and flex wrap. I hope now the concepts are clear for you. What is flex wrap and Flex-Flow?
Before we jump to our next Flexbox property, I will introduce a CSS course on Udemy. This is the most organized and more complete course about CSS on Udemy. This tutorial is come with advanced CSS selectors, functions, variables, CSS animation, CSS grid, Flexbox and Sass. It is the most complete and most organized course on Udemy. It is come with more than 31 plus hour contents. And if you are interested to learn it, then I will provide the link at my description. Now, let's talk about what is the usage of Justify-Content property on Flexbox.
Basically, we use Justify-Content property for horizontal alignment. And this property comes with total 6 value. Let me show you. Our first value is flex start. It is also a default value. Then come flex end, center, space around, space between, space evenly. It is very similar to our grid property, Justify-Content. And we already learned about it in our grid section. So let's start the practical and see how it's work. As you can see, side by side I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using LiveServer extension. And inside the parent container, we have total 4 flex item. And now I'm going to align it using Justify-Content property. So I'm going to type Justify-Content. At first, I'm going to use center value. If I save this file, you can see the result. As you can see, it moved all the flex item center of this container. And next, I'm going to use flex end value. Flex end. If I save this file, as you can see, it shifts all the flex item right corner of this container. And flex start is the default value of this property. If I use this property, let me show you. And save this file, as you can see, it's the default value. If we use any flex value or not, it's going to return this result. Our next value is space between. So I'm going to type space between. If I save this file, as you can see, it moves our first item and last item end to end of this container. If I remove the margin, now it's more clear for you. And also I'm going to remove the padding one. Now you can see the result. And it's going to add all the space between these items. It equally divided this space between flex items. Our next value is space around. Let me show you. If I save this file, now you can see it provides equal space first and last of this item. And between these items, it provides double space. As you can see, it provides equal space before the first item and after the first item. Similarly, it provides equal space before the second item and after the second item. That's why the gap between items are double of this first gap. And our last value is space evenly. If I use this value and save this file, as you can see, it provides similar amount of gap between flex items. So I hope now it's clear for you how we can horizontally align our flex items.
Now let's talk about align item property in Flexbox.
We use align item property for vertical alignment, and we have total 5 value related align items property: flex start, flex end, center, stress, and baseline. If we use flex start value, and then it's going to put my flex item top of this container. And if we use flex end value, then it's going to put my flex item bottom of this container. And if you want to align its center vertically, in that case you can use center value. And stretch is our default value, but baseline value is different one. So let's start the practical and see how it's work. As you can see, side by side I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using Live Server extension. And as you can see, we already create a container, and inside this container we have total 4 flex items. And as you can see, we use display flex property. Using this property, we can convert our container as a flex container. So I'm going to use this property, which is align item, align items. And our first value is stretch. If I save this file, here you can see there is no changes because it's a default value. We are work with vertical alignment, so we need to increase the container height. Height 500 pixel. If I save this file, you can see the result. By default, align item use stretch value. And now I'm going to use the first value, which is flex start. If I save this file, as you can see, now the vertical alignment of this item is top of the container. Similarly, if I use flex end value and save this file, as you can see, all the items are aligned in bottom of this container. And if you want to align this item center of this container, you can use center value. Align item center. You can see the result. It aligns over all the flex items center of this container. Let's add little height in our third item. So I'm going to use height property in our third item. Height 50 pixel. If I set this file, as you can see, now our third item height is 50 pixel. And now I'm going to talk about baseline concept. If I use flex end value, flex end, and set this file, as you can see, items are end at baseline. But if I use start value and set this file, now the baseline end in top. And now I'm going to talk about our last value, which is baseline. But at first, I'm going to increase the third item font size. Font size. So I want to use font size property. Font size 34 pixel. And now also I'm going to reduce second item font size. So I'm going to use font size value once again. And I'm going to use 10 pixel for that. If I save this file, you can see the result. Now you can see the text baseline alignment is different. And now I want to align this text in a same baseline. For that, we need to use baseline property. Let me show you. Text align items. I'm going to use baseline value. Baseline. If I save this file, you can see the result. Now all the text are come in same baseline. And if you want to use horizontal alignment, yes, you can use with that. Just you need to use Justify-Content property. Let's use it. Justify-Content center. If I save this file, you can see the result. And also you can change flex direction. As you know, by default, our flex direction is row. So let's change the flex direction. Flex direction. I'm going to use column value. If I save this file, as you can see, now our align item property work in horizontally, not the vertically. If I use flex end property and save this file, as you can see, it's aligned in horizontally. Because we change x-axis direction and y-axis direction using flex direction property. Now it's follow the opposite cross axis.
Next, we are going to learn align content property.
This property also used for vertical alignment. As you can see, we have lot of different value related align content property. Flex start, flex end, center, stretch, baseline, space around, space between, and space evenly. In our previous tutorial, we have learned about align items. Both the properties are used for same purpose. But there is a difference between this property. Align item used for single row alignment, but align content used for multiple row alignment. Suppose your content not covered in a single row. It wrapped and come to the next row. Then we need to use align content property. So let's start the practical and see how it's work. As you can see, side by side I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using LiveServer extension. And as you can see, I already created a HTML document named index.html. And here you can see in my parent container, we have total 10 flex items. So at first, I'm going to assign width to this container. After height, I'm going to type width. Width equal to 450 pixel. And as you can see, our data is overflown to this container. In this case, we need to use flex wrap property. So I'm going to type flex wrap. And I'm going to use wrap value. If I save this file, you can see the result. And in our previous tutorials, we learned about flex wrap property. Now you can see overflown items are came to the next row. And as you can see, our items are already stretched. So let's use our property align content. So I'm going to type align content. Our first value is stretch. If I save this file, as you can see, there is no changes because stretch is our default value. But if I use flex start value and set this file, now you can see it's moved vertically top. Similarly, if I use flex end value and set this file, now items are moved vertically end. Similarly, if I use center value, then set the file, now all the items are center of this container. Our next property is space between. So I'm going to type space between. If I save this file, you can see the result. This value going to fill all the space between two rows. And if I use space around value, let me show you, and then set this file, here you can see whatever space we have top of the row, it's going to double it between this row. And then come same amount of space bottom of the last row. Then come our next value, which is space evenly. So I'm going to type space evenly. If I save this file, now you can see it add same amount of space between rows. This property only work when we have multiple rows. If I remove some flex item from this container, let me show you, and then set this file, here you can see all the items are moved vertically center. Now this property not going to work properly. If I use different value, something space between, and then set this file, here you can see it's not work. This property exactly work when we have multiple rows. Otherwise, it's not going to work. If we have single row, in that case, we need to use align item property. So I hope now it's clear for you what is align content property.
Our next property is Align-Self.
This property also used for vertical alignment, similar to align item property. As you can see, for this property, we have some similar values. Just we have one new value for this property, which is auto. Then come flex start, flex end, center, stretch, and baseline. Now the question is, what is the difference between align item property and align cell property? Align cell property basically used for individual items. Suppose you want to vertical align individual flex item. In that case, you need to use this property. As you can see in this image, remaining one flex item, all the flex items are came to the top of the container. Because for this particular cell, we use align cell property. Because of this, we have been able to differentiate. So let's start the practical and see how it's work. Here you can see side by side I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using LiveServer extension. And I'm going to use my previous HTML file for this example. As you can see in our flex container, we have total 5 flex items. And as you can see, by default items are stretched. First, I want to align all the items top of the container. So I'm going to use align item property. Align item flex start. If I set this file, you can see the result. And now I'm going to use align cell property. Because now I want to align one individual cell. Suppose I want to move number 3 cell end of this container. Then we need to jump into the item 3 selector and we need to use this property, Align-Self. And I'm going to use flex end value, flex end. If I set this file, you can see the result. We successfully move an individual cell end of this container. Remember, this property is used for vertical alignment. Let's move number 2 cell center of this container. For this, once again I'm jumping to the number 2 selector and I'm going to type Align-Self property, Align-Self center. If I save this file, you can see the result. Let's talk about our new property, which is auto. If I use auto value in our item 2 and then save this file, here you can see it's back to the group. Now this value is related to parent container alignment value. Let's change the parent container alignment. Align-Items center. If I save this file, as you can see, our auto value automatically follow this alignment. If we use Align-Self auto, then it's relatively work with Align-Items value. If we use center value, it's also act like a center value. If we use flex end value, it's also act like a flex end value. Just you need to remember, Align-Self property only work with Flexbox cells, not the Flexbox container. So I hope now it's clear for you what is Align-Self property and what is the use case of this property.
Now let's talk about Flexbox Order.
This property works the same way we did in the grid. So let's start the practical and see how it's work. Here you can see side by side I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using Lifesaver extension. And I already created an HTML document named index.html. And as you can see, inside the Flex container, we have total 6 Flex items. If you remember, using order property, we can change cells positions. Suppose you want to move 4th cell in number 2 position. In that case, we need to use order property. So I'm jumping to the item 5 selector and I'm going to type order. At first, I'm going to pass 0 value. This is the default value. If I save this file, here you can see there is no changes in their order. But if I pass -1, let me show you, and save this file, now you can see our 5th item move first place in this order. By default, all the cells order property value are 0. So order start from minus value. For item 5, we use minus value, that's why it came first. So this is -1. And also I'm going to type -1 in 5th place. -1. Similarly, for our 3rd item, I want to pass -2. Order -2. If I save this file, now you can see it came first place in our order. Because -2 is less than 0 and -1. That's why it came first. And as I told you earlier, lowest value came first. So I want to type -2 in 3rd place. -2. First -2, then comes -1, then 0, 0, 0 and 0. But if I pass 1 value in number 1 item, let me show you, order 1 and then set this file, you can see it has came to the right side. Because 1 is greater than minus value and 0 value. That's why it came after 0. So I'm going to pass +1 here. It's moved lowest to greater value. Now if I pass order 2 in our 4th item, let me show you order 2. And if I set this file, as you can see, now it's came to the last place. Because +2 is greater than 0 and 1. If I save this file, now it's clear for you. Now you can clearly understand how orders are worked. We do not set any order in item number 2 and item number 6. So by default, the order of these items are 0. So I hope now you understand the ordering. Now the question is, where we use the order property? When you want to make your website responsive, then order is the most important property. In desktop view, you want to follow this order. But in mobile view, you want to move item 4 in first place. In that case, order property are very useful. So I hope you got the point.
Now let's see what is the usage of Flex-Grow property.
So let's start the practical and see how it's work. As you can see, side by side I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using Lifesaver extension. And I already created a HTML document named index.html. And as you can see in our parent container, we have total 6 Flex items. So let's use our new property. Basically, Flex-Grow property not work with container. It work with flex items. As you can see, there is a common class name named items for all the flex items. So I'm going to jump into the item selector and I'm going to use our new property, which is Flex-Grow. Flex-Grow. Here we need to pass numeric value. If I pass 0 and then set this file, as you can see, there is no changes. If I pass one value here, so I'm going to type 1 and then save this file. Here you can see all the space are equally divided to flex item. I hope now it's clear for you how Flex-Grow property work. If I pass 2 here and then save this file, as you can see there is no changes. Because we equally divided this space, all of these flex items. That's why it's not going to work. So I'm back to my old position. 1 and I'm going to save this file. And now I want to increase item to width. Yes, we can do it. At first, we need to select the item individually and then we need to use this property, Flex-Grow. And here I'm going to pass 2. If I set this file, you can see the result. You can see here, now it's doubled compared to other cells. Similarly, if I pass 3 and then set this file, now its size is triple compared to all. And now, similarly, I'm going to use the same property in our item 4. I'm going to type Flex-Grow. And I want to expand the width up to 4 times. So I'm going to pass 4 here. If I set this file, you can see the difference. And if I remove the margin between cells, now it's more clear for you. Without item 2 and 4, all of the cells value are 1. For item 2, Flex-Grow property value is 3. And for item 4, Flex-Grow property is 4. So, this property only worked for flex item width. Basically, we use this property when we need to provide equal width all of the cells. So I hope now it's clear for you what is Flex-Grow property.
Now, let's talk about Flex-Basis property.
This property is pretty similar to max width property. Basically, it handles flex item width. So let's see how we can use it practically. As you can see, side by side, I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using Liveserver extension. And I already created a HTML document named index.html. And as you can see, inside the flex container, we have total 6 flex items. And as you can see, we use display property, flex, and also we use flex wrap. We used flex wrap property because if item overflowed, then came down. That's why we use flex wrap. And for every flex item, we set a common width. As you can see, Flex-Grow 1. We learned about this property in our previous tutorial. That's why all the items are take same amount of space. So let's use the property Flex-Basis. So in item 1 selector, I'm going to type Flex-Basis. And here I'm going to pass 250 pixel. If I save this file, as you can see, now our first flex item width is 250 pixel. Now it's work like maximum width. Let's turn on the developer toolbar. If I select this div, as you can see, our first item width is 250 pixel. But without our first item, all the divs are take same amount of space. But if I try to shrink down the browser size, let me show you. As you can see, it's not going to affect the width of this item 1. And if we reduce the browser width, as you can see, now it shrink down. Because this property works like a maximum width. We can reduce the width of this item below than 250 pixel, but we cannot stretch the width of this item more than 250 pixel. And now I'm going to use Flex-Basis property all of this item. So I'm going to comment out this line and I'm going to type Flex-Basis 100 pixel. If I save this file, at first I'm going to increase my browser panel width. Now you can see still our first item width is 250 pixel. But without our first item, every item's widths are 100 pixel. And if I try to increase the browser size a little bit, let me show you. As you can see, item 5 moved to the right corner. Because without first item, every item's trying to maintain 100 pixel width, and also they are trying to fill the space of this browser. Now let's try to reduce the browser width and see what happened. If I try to reduce the browser width, as you can see, most of the items are shipped to the second row because we use FlexWrap property. Otherwise, they are going to overflow to this container. But if I reduce it little more, as you can see, there is no space for two items in a single row. That's why they are shrink down. But as you can see, we reduce the item 1 width. But remaining item 1, still all the item widths are 100 pixel because they have space to extend up to their full width. But if I reduce it more and more, as you can see, all the items are reducing their width. So I hope now it's clear for you, this property works like a max width. Not only that, this property also works like a minimum width also. Let me show you. If I comment out this line, and if we use Flex-Grow property for all of this item and save this file, as you can see, all the items are came to the one row. We use Flex-Basis property only for item 1. And for remaining one, we use Flex-Grow property. And our Flex-Grow value is 1. And as I told you, it's work like a minimum width property also. Let me show you. If I try to reduce the container width, as you can see, it's going to affect all of this item width without item 1. If I try to reduce it more, as you can see, it's not going to affect item 1. Without item 1, all the items are reducing their width. And if we try to reduce it more, as you can see, our last item shipped to the second row. But our item 1 still maintain the same width, 250 pixel. If we use Flex-Basis property with Flex-Grow, then it's work like an minimum width. But if we use Flex-Basis property only, then it's going to act like a max width. Not only that, here we can use percentage value also. Suppose I want to use 50%. 50%. If I save this file, as you can see, it still works properly. Let's increase the percentage value, 90%. If I save this file, now it's clear for you how it's worked. Now every time our first item going to take 90% width of this browser. So this is up to you what kind of value you are going to use. I hope now it's clear for you what is Flex-Basis property.
Now let's talk about another property related CSS Flexbox, which is Flex-Shrink.
Here you can see side by side I opened my Visual Studio Code editor using LiveServer extension, and I already created a HTML document named index.html. And here you can see the 4 different flex items, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is our flex container. If I show you, here you can see we use display flex. And in our common class, I use Flex-Grow property, Flex-Grow 1. That's why item widths are equally divided. But in this tutorial, we are going to learn a new property, which is Flex-Shrink. So let's start it. So at first, I'm going to remove Flex-Grow property, and I'm going to set width 200 pixel. If I save this file and resize my browser width, you can see the result. Here you can see our container width is bigger than items width. And as you can see, all items width are 200 pixel. And now I want to use this Flex-Shrink property in our item 1. But at first, I want to tell you what is the meaning of Flex-Shrink. Basically, we use Flex-Shrink property to create our flex item responsive. If you want to make your items shrinkable, then you need to use this property. Here you can see, it shrinks the item width. Let me clear the concept. So in our item 1, I'm going to use this property, Flex-Shrink. 1 is the default value. If I save this file, here you can see there is no changes. But if I use 0 value and then save this file, now you can see, hey, I did some silly mistake. We need to use this property inside the item 1, not all the items. So I'm going to move this property in our item 1. If I save this file, here you can see item 1 did not change its shape. Now our item 1 is not shrinkable. Now it maintains the fixed width, 200 pixel. If I increase the browser width, you can see the result. And if I shrink down other flex item to their limits, let me show you. Here you can see our other flex item overflown from this container. And as you can see, our first item did not shrink because we use flex shrink value 0. So now it's clear for you, for shrink we can use 0 and 1 value. If we use 1 value and then save this file, now you can see the result. Here you can see now it shrink our item. And if you want to turn off the shrink, then you need to use 0 value. Now I'm going to show you another thing. You already know if we use 0 value, we can turn off the shrink. But if we use 1 value, then we can shrink our flex items. Now, without 0 or 1, we can use different values. Let me show you. If I use 2 here, and set this file, you can see the result. It shrink down our first item compared to other items. Similarly, if I use 3 value, and then set this file, you can see, again it shrink down our item 1. So, if we do not use 0 value, then our item is always shrinkable. And now, I'm going to show you the second method. How can we use this shrink property in a different way? For that, at first, I'm going to remove the item width. Then I set this file. And also, I'm going to use shrink value 1. And now, I'm going to use Flex-Basis property. Flex-Basis. Flex-Basis 200 pixel. Flex-Basis means dynamic width. Now you can see we cannot apply any width to all the item. We apply width in our item 1 using Flex-Basis property. Now, if I save this file and try to reduce the browser width, as you can see, when blank space is over, and if I try to reduce it, you can see our item 1 also shrink down. Now the question is, why it shrink down? Because we use 1 value. But if I use 0 value, and save this file, now you can see our items are overflown from this container. But if I pass 2 value and then save this file, as you can see, it won't work. If I use value 1 and save this file, you can see there is no changes. In this method, our other values are not going to work. And if you want to cover the remaining space, in that case, you can use Flex-Grow value. Let me show you. So in our item 4, I'm going to use Flex-Grow value. Flex-Grow 1. If I save this file, as you can see, our item 4 covered the whole blank page. And if I reduce the browser width, you can see our item 4 automatically shrink down. And when shrink over, now it effect on item 1. I hope at that point it's clear for you. And now I'm going to set width to this container. As you can see, we do not use any width to this container. And now I'm going to set container width. So here I'm going to type width, width, width 600 pixel. If I save this file and increase my browser width, now you can see our container size is fixed. And now I'm going to reduce the container width. I'm going to use 300 pixel. If I save this file, you can see it shrink all the items, also the item 1. And if I shrink down the container a little bit, something 250 pixel, and then save this file, here you can see it's also worked. Because we use 1 value here, flex shrink 1. But if I use 0 value and then save this file, you can see a different result. Here you can see other items are overflown from this container. I hope now it's clear for you what is flex shrink property.
Now let's see how we can use auto margin property with Flexbox.
Here you can see side by side I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using Live Server extension. And I already created a HTML document named index.html. As you can see in my browser, there is a parent container. And inside this parent container, we have a div item. So this is our flex container and this is our flex item. And now I'm going to show you how we can get different result using margin auto value. So in our item, I'm going to type margin, and I'm going to use auto value. If I save this file, you can see the result. Here you can see it horizontally and vertically align center. But the question is why? Because there are a lot of free space inside this container. That's why it's aligned in center. Now I'm going to use margin left auto, margin left. If I save this file, as you can see, here you can see it automatically shift to the right side of this container. Our item leaving the space on the left side and shift to the right side. And if I use margin top, auto top, then set this file. Now you can see it's coming down from the top because it has free space at the top. With that, I'm going to use margin left property. Margin left. And once again, I'm going to use auto value. If I set this file, now you can see our flex item shipped to the right bottom corner of this container. I hope now you can understand how we can get different alignment just using auto value. Let me show you another example. Suppose we have a container, and inside this container we have total 4 flex items. Here you can see the items, item 1, item 2, item 3 and item 4. And I set different background color to these items. And now I'm going to use our margin auto value. I'm going to use it inside our item 2. Margin right auto. If I set this file, you can see the result. Here you can see our item 2 take all the available space inside the container, and it's provide a huge margin and shift item 3 and item 4 right side of this container. Similarly, if I use margin left property, let me show you margin left and then set this file. Now you can see it's provide all the space left side of this item 2. And if I use the same property from item 1, so I'm going to cut this property and paste it here. If I set this file, now you can see it's provide all the space before item 1 and it's move all the item right side of this container. So when you work with the responsive side, you can use this trick to align your flex item. So I hope now it's clear for you using auto value how we can create different layout in Flexbox.
Now let's talk about the last property about Flexbox, which is nested flex.
As you can see, there is a container, and inside this container we have total 3 div items. And if we convert our parent container into flex container, then we call this div flex item. But if we use display flex property in a particular item, in that case, it would be a nested flex container. And these are also flex items inside this container. So let's start the practical and see how we can use it. As you can see, side by side, I open my Visual Studio Code editor and my browser using Live Server extension. And I already created a HTML document named index.html. And here you can see a parent div item class container. And inside this container, we have total 4 Flexbox items. As you can see, in our container class, we use display property flex. First, I'm going to change the direction of these flex items. So here, I'm going to use Flex-Direction property. Flex-Direction. And I'm going to use column value. If I set this file, you can see the result. And we already set 100 pixel height to our items. And now, I'm going to add 3 more div inside our second item. So here, I'm going to add total 3 more div. At first, I'm going to create a div with sub-item class. Class sub-item. Also, I'm going to use another class named sub-item 1 for our first div. And then I'm going to duplicate this line total 2 times. So I'm going to press Shift Alt down arrow. Sub-item 2 and sub-item 3. Here you can see I set a common class named sub-item. And also we set different class name for each items. Then inside this div item, I'm going to type A, capital B and capital C. If I set this file, as you can see, it returned our items row-wise. And now I'm going to convert our second Flexbox item into a Flexbox container. So here I'm going to use a property named display. Display flex. And if I set this file, as you can see, by default it arranges our item in a single row. Now let's set a background color to our items. For that, dot item2 greater than sign dot our class name, which is sub item. Then inside the curly braces, I'm going to set background color. Background white. Also, I'm going to set a text color. Color black. If I set this file, you can see the result. And now I want to equally divide our nested flex item inside this container. For that, I'm going to use a property named Flex-Grow. Flex-Grow. Flex-Grow 1. If I set this file, you can see the result. Let me give a margin to our items that can tear you. margin 1 pixel. If I save this file, you can see the result. So as you can see, we have a parent flex container, and inside this parent flex container, we have total 4 flex items, and we convert our second flex item into a nested flex container. And inside the nested flex container, we put total 3 flex items, A, B, and C. So I hope now it's clear for you how we can create nested flex items. It's not a very difficult one, it's a very easy process.
So we learn all the Flexbox property. Now it's time to apply this property and create a project. Basically, we are going to create a simple drop-down menu project using Flexbox. So let's jump into the code editor.
Welcome to our first project related CSS Flexbox, and in this project we are going to create drop-down navigation menu using CSS Flexbox property. As you can see, after hover my service section, you can see it open a drop-down menu. And then if I hover web development section, also you can see it's open another drop-down section, HTML, PHP and JavaScript. So let's see how we can create this one. So as you can see, finally we are in my Visual Studio Code editor, and also I am in my current working directory. Inside this directory we have two files, index.html file and style.css file. And we have a folder named image, and inside this folder we have one picture, nature.jpg. And here you can see in my HTML document, we already link our CSS file, style.css. So at first, I'm going to complete the HTML section. So inside the body tag, first I'm going to take a div tag. Div dot, and I'm going to take a class name. And our class name is menu area underscore area. And inside this div tag, first I'm going to take UL tag. As you know, UL tag used for unordered list. And for menu items, we need some li tag, li. And inside the li tag, I'm going to add anchor tag, a. We don't need to redirect it any page, that's why I'm going to use hashtag sign. And then I'm going to type our first menu item name. And our first menu name is home. Then I'm going to duplicate this line. And our next menu item is about. And our third menu item is services. So I'm going to remove about, and here I'm going to type services. And our fourth menu item is portfolio. So here I'm going to type portfolio. And our last menu item is contact. Contact. So this is our main menu section. And now we need to create a drop-down option for services. So inside the li tag, I'm going to take another ul tag, ul. And also I'm going to assign a class to this ul tag. Class dropdown 1 underscore 1. And for dropdown items, again we need to tag li tag, li. Also we need to tag anchor tag, a. And I don't want to redirect it any page, that's why I use hashtag. And what kind of services we provide? We provide logo design, web design, and web development. So here I'm going to type logo design. Logo design. Then I'm going to duplicate this line. Our next service is web design. So here I'm going to type web design. And our last service is web development. So inside the services section, we have total 3 more subsections. And now I want to add 3 more menu items inside the web development section. So inside the li tag, again I'm going to take ul tag, ul. And also I'm going to assign a class name, class dropdown 2 underscore 2. And again inside the ul tag, I'm going to take li tag, li. Then our anchor tag. And I don't want to redirect it, that's why I use hashtag. And inside the web development services, we work with Python, PHP and JavaScript. So our first menu item is Python. Then I'm going to duplicate this line, and our second menu item is PHP. And our third menu item is JavaScript. And if I save this file and show you my browser, now you can see how it's look. Without CSS, our menu bar look like this. But here you can see the clear structure of our menu bar. Inside the services section, we have three another section. And inside the web development section, again we have three another items: Python, PHP and JavaScript. So in our first step, we complete our HTML part. In the next part, we are going to start our styling part. So let's start the styling part. First, I'm going to select universal selector, which is star sign. Then inside the curly braces, I'm going to type our first property name, margin. Margin 0. Then I'm going to type padding. Padding also 0. And our next property is box sizing. Box sizing. Box sizing border box. And now I'm going to select all the anchor tag from the menu area section. So I'm going to copy the class name menu area and back to the CSS file, and here I'm going to type dot menu area and our anchor tag also. That's why I press A. Then inside the curly braces, I'm going to use our first property, which is display. Display flex. And our next property is align item. Align items center. Our next property is justify content. Justify content. It is also center. And for font color, I'm going to use white color. Color white. And then I'm going to take background color for our menu bar. Background. And for background, I'm going to use RGB value. RGB. For red, I'm going to type 57. For green, I'm going to type 57 again. And for blue, again I'm going to type 57. If I save this file and show you my browser, you can see the result. And next, I'm going to provide height to all this anchor tag. With that, also I'm going to change font style. So here, I'm going to type height 50 pixel. And font family sans serif. And font weight bold. And I don't want any underline to our anchor tag. That's why we need to use another property, which is text decoration. Text decoration none. Also, I want all the menu item. That's why we need to use another property, which is text transformation. Text transformation. Text transform uppercase. If I save this file and show you my browser, now you can see the result. Now our fonts look much better than previous one. So using Flexbox, we horizontally align all the menu items center of this page. And now I'm going to add hover effect to all of these items. So let's back to the Visual Studio Code editor. And now I'm going to select dot main menu, our anchor tags, hover. Then inside the curly braces, our first property is background. Background, and our background color is gray. With that, I want font color white. Color white. If I save this file and back to my browser again, and if I hover my cursor on these items, you can see the effect. And now we need to put all this nav item into a single row. For that, we need to select UL tag. So here I'm going to type dot menu area UL. Then inside the curly braces, our first property name is list style. List style, which is none. I don't want any style in our list items. That's why I use list style none. With that, we need to use another important property, which is display. Display flex. If I save this file and back to my browser, now you can see it tried to align it in a single row. But we do not provide any width, that's why it's not work perfectly. And now we need to provide width to all the list items. So let's back to the Visual Studio Code editor again. And here I'm going to type dot menu area li tag. And I'm going to select all the li tags. Then inside the curly braces, our first property is position. Position relative. And our next property is width. Width 100%. And our third property is text align. Text align. Text align center. So if I set this file and back to my browser, you can see the result. So as you can see, it's worked for all the list items who are from main menu area. Now I don't want to show our services section until I hover on it. For that, we need to hide our li tag from Dropdown 1. So let's back to the Visual Studio Code, and here I'm going to type dot dropdown 1 underscore 1, and I'm going to select all the li tag from it. Then inside the curly braces, here I'm going to use a display property. Display none. With that, I'm going to use another property named position. Position relative. If I set this file and show you my browser, let me show you. As you can see, now our dropdown section is not visible. But I want to visible it when I hover on it. For that, we need to select all the li tag from Dropdown 1. Let me show you. Dot menu area, and then I'm going to select all the li tag. With that, I want to add hover selector. With that, I'm going to select all the list item from Dropdown 1. So here I'm going to type dot Dropdown 1 direct child selector, our tag name li. Then inside the curly braces, our first positioning property is top 0. Also, I'm going to use another property which is display block. If I save this file and back to my browser and hover my cursor, particularly service section, now you can see the result. Now it displays all the drop-down menus, logo design, web design, and web development. But our second drop-down option not work perfectly. But before, we need to perfectly arrange our drop-down 1 menu section. So let's back to the Visual Studio Code editor again. And here I'm going to select dot drop-down 1. Then inside the curly braces, our first property is position. Position absolute. And to arrange it perfectly, we need to use another property which is display flex. And I want to arrange drop-down items column-wise. That's why we need to use another property which is Flex-Direction. Flex-Direction column. And also we need to set width to our drop-down box. So here I'm going to type width 100%. If I save this file and back to my browser and hover my cursor on service section, now you can see it perfectly. Here you can see we perfectly align our drop-down items column-wise. And now we need to show our second drop-down menu. For that, nearly we need to do same thing. So let's back to the Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to duplicate this section. So at first, I'm going to hide our drop-down 2 menu. Drop-down 2, display none. And now I don't need this position property, so I remove it. And also we need to add a hover effect drop-down to list item. For now, I don't need to use direct child selector for that, and here I'm going to change drop-down 1 to drop-down 2. Also, I'm going to remove menu area, and here I'm going to type dot drop-down underscore 1. And also, we don't need this top property because I want to show it left side. And I'm going to save this file. And next, I'm going to change the selector name drop-down 1 to drop-down 2. And I'm going to remain all the property and value same. But I'm going to remove width property. And here I'm going to type top 0. And here I'm going to use another property which is top 0. Our next property is left 100%. And also I'm going to set width for drop down to menu section. Width 200 pixel. If I save this file and back to my browser and hover on service and hover on web development section, it's not work. I think I did some mistake. Let's back to the HTML file. As you can see, we did a spelling mistake in Dropdown too. We need to use N, not M. If I save this file and save my style file and back to my browser again and reload my browser and hover on services and also hover on web development, now you can see the result. Now our menu perfectly worked. So as you can see how we can create drop-down menu bar using Flex property. And next, I'm going to add a header image and a text using Flex properties. And now I'm going to add a header image. For that, we need to take another div tag. Div dot, and I want to set a class name, which is banner area. Banner underscore area. And inside this div tag, I'm going to add a h2 tag. And here I'm going to type power of Flexbox. Power of Flexbox. And I'm going to save this file. Now let's design the banner area in our CSS file. So I'm going to copy this class name banner area, and in my CSS file I'm going to type dot banner area. Then inside the curly braces, our first property is background image. Background image. For background image, I'm going to take this picture, which is in our image folder, nature.jpg. So here I'm going to type URL, then our folder name, image, slash our image name, nature.jpg. With that, I'm going to set the background size. Background size cover. Also, we need to pass background position. Background position center. I want to horizontally and vertically center this background. That's why I pass center and center. And now I'm going to set height to this background. Height 100 VH. If I set this file and back to my browser, you can see the result. And now we need to align this text center of this image. For that, we need to use display flex property. So let's back to the Visual Studio Code editor, and here I'm going to type display flex align item center. Also, I'm going to pass Justify-Content center. If I set this file and back to my browser, you can see the result. Power of Flexbox. And now we need to increase the text size and change the color. For that, I'm going to select our header tag dot banner area h2. Then inside the curly braces, our first property is text transform. Text transform uppercase. With that, I'm going to change the color. Color white. Also, I'm going to change the font size. Font size 60 pixel. Also, I'm going to change the font family. Font family monospace. And I'm going to set this file. If I back to my browser, you can see the result. But it's not properly visible because of the background. So now we need to add a gradient overlay effect to this background. Let's do it. So here I'm going to type linear gradient. And between these two values, I'm going to use a comma. And inside the round braces, we need to pass starting and ending point gradient value. So here I'm going to use RGBA value. RGBA, A for alpha, which is used for transparency. So for red, I'm going to use 0. For green, also I'm going to use 0. And for blue, again I'm going to use 0. But for alpha value, I'm going to use 0.6. This is the one side of gradient value. We need to pass another side of gradient value. So here I'm going to use a comma and I'm going to duplicate this line. So I'm going to copy it and here I'm going to paste it. So if I save this file and back to my browser, now you can see the result. So I successfully created a navigation bar using Flexbox property. It is one of the good usage and example of Flexbox property.
So thanks for watching this video guys. If you like it, then like, share and subscribe to my channel.